Eduardo Castañeda awoke with the vineyard even before the birds had found their courage to sing. In the lavender hush before sunrise, he moved between rows of Tempranillo vines, checking the buds, touching leaves as though they were sleeping children. The soil felt cool through his espadrilles, and the air carried faint whispers of river mist and distant church bells. Only after he had walked the length of the estate did he allow himself a slow breath, one that confirmed his new life, one without applause, without the kill, without the weight of the montera upon his brow. He had been El Relampago, the lightning bolt, once the most explosive matador in all of Spain, his faena a sermon to death itself. He could hear the ghosts of the arena even now, the tremor of 40,000 hearts, the swoosh of red silk, the thud of muscle meeting sword. And then, with a flourish, the crowd's roar had folded itself into a single hush the moment the bull dropped, as if creation itself waited to exhale. He retired at 38, still nimble, still adored, but hounded by the creeping suspicion that his choreography had become too precious to him, that one misstep would end in tragedy too monstrous for applause to disguise. Now he preferred vines to horns, and corks to swords, pale amber in bottles rather than bright scarlet in sand. He had purchased this estate in La Rioja, reconstructed its crumbling bodega, and renamed it Viñedos del Relámpago, an inside joke between him and the silent vines. The locals knew their famous neighbor, but colluded graciously in his seclusion. Tourists occasionally lost their way, parking their rental cars on the gravel drive and begging for autographs, but Eduardo, an adept pruner of both vines and conversation, sent them off with polite smiles and a free bottle that tasted of apology. In late June, the vintages rested, and pruning kept his hands busy enough to still the echoes of distant horns. That particular morning carried an unfamiliar hum. Tires on gravel, a vehicle heavier than the modest cars of the villages. Eduardo peered down the lane as a black van came to a halt by the archway. A slender woman emerged, camera bag slung across her shoulder, notebook tucked beneath an arm. She wore hiking boots stained with dust, and an expression that suggested she would rather describe the world than reside comfortably within it. "Señor Castañeda," she called out in accented Spanish, soft yet sure. "Buenos dias. My name is Liliana Clark. I wrote you several times." Eduardo's mind flicked through unopened envelopes discarded in a kitchen drawer, email notifications deleted without reading, voicemails ignored. "I received many letters," he answered, stepping closer but not extending a hand. "I'm making a documentary series for the European Heritage Channel," Liliana said. "I want to explore how the legends of the corrida reshape themselves after the arena. Your arc is perfect." "My arc?" Eduardo echoed, unsure whether to laugh. "Arc is for arrows, señorita, or for narratives that need a neat ending. I have none to give." Liliana smiled, irrepressible. "That is precisely why I am here. The story does not end in the ring." Eduardo smelled youthful insistence like perfume. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the tasting terrace. Hospitality, he reminded himself, cost him little more than time. He poured 2 glasses of his garnacha rosado. Liliana inhaled and closed her eyes before sipping. "Rosés and white pepper," she whispered. "There's a current of strawberry that slips away before you can catch it." "Wine is a shy lover," Eduardo said, amused. "If you grasp too quickly, it bruises." Then a tempting formality. "But forgive me, you came for an interview, not an enology lesson." Liliana folded herself into a wrought iron chair. "Actually, both fascinate me. People think a life can be bottled, corked, and stored, but the past ferments. I want to see what happens when you uncork it." The phrase struck Eduardo like a flick of a cape, muscular, poised, demanding response. He looked toward the vines, each one tethered to a wire trellis like a patient beast. "My past is an old wine I have already drank," he said eventually. "No need to reopen. I believe your audience Deserves the vintage you never released, she pressed gently. Tell them why you left when you were still invincible. What did you carry with you from the sand to these vines? Eduardo's fingers tensed around the stem of his glass. The truth was a secret harvested under moonlight. He had felt his nerve thinning, his instincts dulling, an interior slackening invisible to fans. Pride had lured him to push through. Fear had saved him. He imagined the documentary aired to millions, each guessing which moment had cracked him. That guessing would hurt more than the truth itself, yet the truth was unbearable in its nakedness. I cultivate grapes, not memories, he said. I'm sorry you traveled so far. Politeness sliced like a dull knife. Liliana set her glass down with deliberate silence, then retrieved a small camera from her bag. Without turning it on, she placed it on the table so it faced him like a single, unblinking eye. Permission is yours to grant, she said, but I was prepared for refusal. If I stay in the village tonight, would you consider letting me tour the fields tomorrow? No questions, only images. Eduardo considered. To deny her completely felt petty. To allow her too near felt perilous. Yet the vines were nothing to hide. They spoke through leaves and fruit, never gossiping. Very well, he conceded. 9 o'clock. Wear boots you do not love. Liliana's grin flashed before she packed the camera away. Thank you, maestro. He flinched at the old honorific. She left soon after, promising to disturb nothing. Eduardo watched the van disappear, dust swirling like restless bowls beneath the sun. That night he couldn't sleep. Restlessness rode him as it once had before a big corrida. The insomnia of calculation, of rehearsing Veronicas and passes. He paced beside barrels stacked like soldiers in the dim cellar. His footsteps echoed in caverns that once held shouts of ole. He opened a bottle meant for next year's release and drank guilty sips, tasting more wood than fruit. The oak was still too forward, too honest. It reminded him of Liliana. Morning perched golden on the horizon when she arrived. True to her word, she asked no questions. She merely filmed. Rows of vines bowing under new leaves. Eduardo's hands snipping unwanted shoots. A blackbird hopping along irrigation tubes. She framed sunlight striking dew, captured how Eduardo knelt to rebury an exposed root, how he paused to listen to distant thunderheads massing beyond the Sierra de la Demanda. Through the lens she was a hunter, silent, patient, lethal in her accuracy. At midday, he invited her to the stone cottage near the press house. They shared bread rubbed with tomato, olive oil, and anchovy, then thin slices of chorizo fragrant with paprika. The camera remained off, resting on the table like a sheathed sword. You film very quietly, Eduardo observed. Silence lets the subject breathe, Liliana replied. A story can suffocate if the storyteller occupies all the air. She lifted her water glass in salute. Your vineyard breathes beautifully. Something softened inside Eduardo. He realized he had expected aggression, the chase of scandal. She pursued something subtler. Nuance over notoriety. Stay for the festival next week, he heard himself say. San Pedro's feast in La Guardia. We open the first barrels of last autumn. Her brows rose. And will you let me film it? If you wish, he answered, surprising himself again. Liliana accepted a room in the guest house near the old olive tree. Days passed with a rhythm older than either of them. Dawn pruning, afternoon fermentation checks, evenings of gentle conversation on the terrace. Liliana sometimes filmed him in golden hour without warning, but he felt less like prey than partner. She asked about soil pH and trellising methods, tasting notes and frost mitigation. Of the arena, she asked nothing. On the fifth night, thunder finally breached the sky. Rain drummed the tiled roof with hunger. Electricity flickered, then died. Candles turned the bodega into a cathedral. The barrels exhaled oaken incense while Eduardo and Liliana shared a casserole of white beans and pork. Wind rattled shutters like hooves against gates. She cradled her wineglass and studied him. May I ask one question about the bulls? Eduardo's chest tightened, but he nodded. He owed her something. Was there a single moment you knew you were done? She whispered, as if fearing the storm might overhear. Images shot through him. The final corrida in Madrid, the bull named Soberano, its skin glistening blue-black beneath the noon sun. He recalled how the animal had stumbled on entrance, shoulder giving way for a breath, a limp, a flaw. The crowd booed the rancher for sending a compromised beast, yet as Eduardo approached, Soberano lifted his head with a gaze void of submission. The limp evaporated. Eduardo realized the stumble had been show, an instinctual deception. The bull was testing the matador's mercy. I saw intelligence, Eduardo said after a long pause, and loyalty to life itself. He was like a fallen soldier who decides right before death to stand again. I realized I could no longer pretend it was a dance. It was only killing. Liliana's eyes glistened in candlelight, salt polished by flame. Did you hesitate? Yes, Eduardo confessed. I drove the sword an instant too late. It lodged poorly. The animal bled longer than it should. I heard no cheers, only its breathing. That sound followed me into every night thereafter. Outside, thunder cracked like distant applause. Liliana reached across the table, her fingers light on his wrist, not to comfort, but to affirm. Thank you, she said. Electricity returned, humming apology. They cleared dishes in silence thick as lees settling in barrels. The following morning, Eduardo found Liliana already filming the sunrise. Over breakfast, she told him she would like to interview him formally, just once, he agreed. They chose the barrel room, whose ambient cold felt honest. Liliana set up 2 chairs among the casks. She placed a lapel mic on his shirt collar. Her fingers brushed skin that had once settled under sequins and gold braids. Now it bore sun, wind, and the memory of horns. The red light blinked. Liliana asked simple questions at first. His first bullfight in a provincial plaza at age 14, the thrill of entering Las Ventas, the discipline required to hold fear and flourish together in a cape's swirl. Eduardo answered, editing neither grammar nor soul. When she pressed about Soberano, he spoke as though the bull were there, eyes level, air carved by breath. Once he faltered, voice cracked, but Liliana did not rescue him with another question. She let the silence ferment. Eduardo finally inhaled and continued, revealing the moment he approached the fallen bull and whispered, "Perdonadme," before the coup de grace. I knew then that forgiveness was insufficient, he told the lens, so I changed my life instead. Camera battery died 20 minutes later, an organic end he couldn't have scripted. Liliana checked the footage. Perfect, she murmured. That night they brought 2 bottles to the garden behind the main house. Fireflies stitched green embroidery among lavender stalks. They drank the 2010 Gran Reserva, a wine Eduardo had believed he would share only with ghosts. Liliana inhaled its incense of leather and dried cherry. She spoke of her own past, a father who wrote sports columns, chasing boxers and footballers for stories, a childhood in which legends ate dinner at their kitchen table, yet left crumbs of loneliness for her to clean. I promised I'd never treat my subjects like trophies, she said. I want to know them, not hunt them. Eduardo tipped his glass toward hers. Then perhaps you have succeeded. Liliana tilted her head. It's a more favor, she said shyly. I would like to film the moment you label this Gran Reserva. The first bottle, I mean, closing a cycle. Eduardo hesitated. The labeling ceremony was intimate, performed alone before dawn each year, yet he sensed how her request was less a filmmaker's greed than a pilgrim's wish for closure. You may film, he agreed, but only if you place the first label yourself. Her smile trembled with gratitude. Labeling day arrived, last rays of July painting the bodega honey-like. Liliana filmed Eduardo as he affixed the capsule to a bottle's neck. He handed it to her, offered a sheet of cream-white labels, edged in gold. She pressed one gently to the glass, smoothing bubbles with her thumbs. Camera lens watched with patient reverence. When it was done, Eduardo took the bottle, raised it level with his eyes. This, he declared softly, is Soberano. Liliana's camera lowered in surprise. He explained, each year I dedicate one bottle to the bull who changed my life. I cellar it forever, not to drink, only to remember. Liliana stared, tears unhidden. She placed the camera on a barrel and stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around him with the caution of one embracing a relic that might shatter. He returned the embrace, startled by how natural it felt to share both weight and warmth. Afterward, they walked among the vines while cicadas rehearsed their summer aria. Dusk spooled copper threads across the horizon. Eduardo felt unsheathed, yet unafraid. You will show the world my weakness, he said. I will show them your truth, Liliana corrected. Fame is louder than truth, but truth echoes longer. He nodded. Then let it echo. The documentary premiered in autumn, in a theater in Logroño close enough to his estate that Eduardo could drive there, yet distant enough that reporters might tire before chasing him home. The film was lean, elegant, refusing melodrama. It lingered on the vine leaves in morning light, on the rainfall's kiss against barrels, on Eduardo's hands trembling as he whispered to Soberano's invisible ghost. When the credits rolled, silence claimed the hall. Then applause rose different from the arena's roar, gentler, like rain beginning. Eduardo closed his eyes, let it wash him without drowning. Afterward, in the lobby, smelling of popcorn and cologne, strangers approached, not with aggression, but with restraint, asking to shake his hand rather than salvage a signature. Among them were former aficionados who had accompanied him through dozens of corridas. Now they spoke more of wine than of death. Eduardo realized Liliana had rewritten his myth, from lightning bolt to cultivator of quiet storms within the grape. Back at the estate that night, Liliana opened a bottle of crianza, and they sat under a sky shyly surrendering its stars. Are you at peace? She asked. I am in motion, Eduardo replied. Peace is a still pond. I am a river. But the river is gentler now. Liliana touched the back of his hand. Rivers carve valleys, maestro. They make fertile what was barren. He turned his hand to lace fingers with hers. The vineyard exhaled nocturnal scents of earth and chlorophyll. A fox barked in distant dark. Eduardo felt something uncork within him, an aftertaste of possibility, of future seasons. Stay, he murmured, uncertain whether he invited her for a night, a harvest, or the indefinite span between storms. She answered not with words, but by leaning her head on his shoulder, trusting the silence she had cultivated all along. The moon rose, silvering leaves that once shimmered only for him. Now they shimmered for two perhaps, some day for more. In the cellars, barrels slept, dreaming of grapes yet to be picked, of hands yet to crush, of stories yet to pour. Above them, a retired matador and an ambitious filmmaker sipped the world slowly, letting it breathe, letting it become what it always wished to be. Not a spectacle, but a sip of truth shared between souls brave enough to uncork it.